दोस्तों, गुड मॉर्निंग। मैं हूं आपका दोस्त मदन सिंह एंड आई एम गोइंग टू टॉक टू यू अबाउट एक बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट हिस्सा हिस्ट्री में से हिंदुस्तान में, जो कि आजकल भी हमें याद आता है। एंड दिस इज़ वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट बैटल्स इन द हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंडिया। और इसमें मैं एक दो बातें आपको बताऊंगा विच यू विल अंडरस्टैंड दैट how the Hindus have always been subservient to their rulers. And this was the Battle of Buxar, fought in 1764 between the East India Company and the local Indian North Indian rulers, mainly the Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh, and the remnants of the Mughal Empire. These three had joined up to try and oust the British out of India, यानी उनको हिंदुस्तान से बाहर निकाल के उखाड़ के फेंक देना। पर एक पॉइंट इसमें मैं पहले बताता हूँ कि उस वक़्त ये जो लड़ाई 1764 की हुई, वो बेसिकली ए फाइट था बिटवीन मुस्लिम रूलर्स एंड ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी। और ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी में बहुत कम सोल्जर थे जो ब्रिटिशर्स थे, एंड मोस्ट ऑफ द सोल्जर्स वर द sepoys from the Madras and the Bengal regiments. And as far as the Indian force was concerned, all the Nawabs, whether it was the Nawab of Bengal, Awadh, or the Mughal emperor, they were all Muslims, and most of their army was Hindu. So here is a dichotomy. आप जरा सोचिए कि कैसे ये बैटल हुआ था. It was the Muslim rulers who were fighting the British, and both sides were using Indian troops. The British had about 1,000 Indian soldiers, British soldiers of British blood, and their commander was a British, and his name was Major Henry Munro. And the command of the Indian forces was in the hands of Mir Qasim and the Mughal emperor and the Nawab of Awadh, Nawab Suja. So ये एक बहुत ही फेमस बैटल है इंडियन हिस्ट्री में, बिकॉज दिस डिसाइडेड कि इंडिया में क्या होने वाला है फॉर द नेक्स्ट 200 years. Now, before this battle, as I told you, as you are aware, there was the Battle of Plassey in 1757, 7 years earlier, where Robert Clive जो था general of the East India Company and Governor General जो था, he met in battle with the Nawab of Bengal, सिराजुद्दौला. और नवाब के पास तकरीबन 1 लाख सोल्जर्स थे, एंड द ब्रिटिश यानी रॉबर्ट क्लाइव हैड ओनली 11,000, but the Nawab was defeated because there were a lot of traitors in his rank. बहुत से दोगले आदमी उनके नवाब के थे. Of course, नवाब की आर्मी जो थी बस प्रीडोमिनेटली हिंदू. एट द सेम टाइम उसका जो मेन कमांडर था, ही वॉज मीर जाफर एंड ही वॉज अ मुस्लिम. और जो मीर जाफर है उसको एक खिताब दिया जाता है, दैट इज नवाब हिंद हिंद गद्दार. So he was known as the Hind Gaddar even now, a man who betrayed India at that time, betrayed the Nawab of Bengal, and ultimately Nawab Sirajuddaula was captured. His eyes were taken out, he was gouged and killed uh, by his opponents. And one of them was Mir Qasim. Now the same Mir Qasim was now commanding the Bengal army against the British East India Company army. And then there was Suja, the Nawab of Awadh, and the Mughal emperor. और उस वक़्त एक इम्पॉर्टेंट फोर्स जो इंडिया में था वह द मराठास. They were the only Hindu rulers in India at that time, and they had been badly defeated in the 1761 Third Battle of Panipat at when they faced Ahmed Shah Abdali. और उस दिन एक रिकॉर्ड है कि 1 लाख मराठा डाइड फाइटिंग द अब्दाली आर्मी. सो अब मराठा पावर वॉज ग्रेटली ब्रोकन, एंड मोर और लेस मराठा वर नॉट यूनाइटेड. इनके 3 मेजर रूलर्स थे. फर्स्ट भोसले वॉज देयर, देन सिंधिया वॉज देयर, ही वॉज रूलिंग इन ग्वालियर, एंड इन दौर होलकर वॉज रूलिंग. and they never joined up with the Muslim rulers who were fighting the East India Company at Buxar. आफ्टर प्लेसी रॉबर्ट क्लाइव तो रिमेन्ड इन फोर्ट विलियम कैलकाटा में वहीं रुके रहे, तो उन्होंने मेजर हेनरी मुनरो को भेज दिया कि यू गो एंड फाइट दीज पीपल, दैट इज द मुस्लिम रूलर्स ऑफ इंडिया. ना उस वक्त एट इन 1764 इंडिया वाज डिवाइडेड इन अबाउट 26 कंट्रीज. देयर वर 26 इंडिपेंडेंट कंट्रीज. एंड एक सोचने वाली बात है कि अगर एट दैट टाइम ब्रिटिश हैड नॉट वन, then these 26 countries would have continued to be independent countries. And at the end of World War II, जब यूनाइटेड नेशंस बना, तो ये 26 कंट्रीज मेंबर होती यूनाइटेड नेशंस की. और एक और पॉइंट बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट विच यू मस्ट अंडरस्टैंड इज कि ये जो 26 कंट्रीज के, इनके मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द रूलर्स वर ऑल मुस्लिम्स. एंड वास्ट एरियाज ऑफ दिस लैंड, दैट इज इंडिया, was ruled by Muslim rulers. All over there were Muslim rulers. Like Hyderabad was ruled by the Nizam again with a Muslim ruler, and Junagadh in Gujarat was again a Muslim ruler, and Kashmir was again at that time a Muslim ruler, and Mysore also was being ruled by the Muslims, and Bengal was being ruled by the Muslims. Bihar, which is ours, was ruled by the Muslims, and there was a small Mughal empire in and around Delhi, which was again ruled by Muslims. So India was at that time divided into about 26 countries. Maybe 20 or 22 of them were all ruled had Muslim rulers. Now this is a very important fact, and आप जरा इस बात को गौर से समझ लीजिए कि 22, the majority of the rulers at that time were Muslim, and the praja, that means the public, was Hindu. The armies were Hindus, but they were fighting for these people. Now ये एक fact of history है, and nobody can deny it. And of course आजकल people are trying to rewrite the history, but you cannot rewrite what is a fact. How are you going to rewrite the fact which I have stated? Well, gentlemen, coming down to the battle, the Marathas did not join this coalition against the British. मैंने जैसे पता क्यों नहीं ज्वाइन किए, बिकॉज दे हैड ऑलरेडी बीन बैडली डिफीटेड इन 1761, और उनको समझ नहीं आ रहा था कि हमें करना क्या है. They didn't know what the hell to do, and they were just sitting on their haunches, and they were really mentally not ready for battle. They did fight the British about 30 or 40 years later, but उनकी टक्कर हो गई उस टाइम with the Duke of Wellesley. Now Duke of Wellesley एक बहुत ही शानदार सिपाही थे, जनरल थे ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी के, और यही जनरल थे जो बाद में यूरोप में वापस जाके इन्होंने नेपोलियन को हरा दिया. सो यू कैन जस्ट इमेजिन what sort of a man this general was. But now in 1764 the command was only with the major. And पर जो नवाब थे मीर कासिम वगैरह, they were very confident कि हम जीत जाएंगे, और उन्होंने एक मीटिंग की मुगल एम्पर और द नवाब ऑफ अवध एंड द नवाब ऑफ बंगाल, तीनों ने मीटिंग की, और दे वर वेरी कॉन्फिडेंट ऑफ विक्ट्री. बिकॉज जो नवाब ऑफ अवध था उसने कहा कि मैंने एक तरीका ढूंढ लिया है अंग्रेज़ों को हराने के लिए. आई हैव गॉट अ मेथड टू बीट द ब्रिटिश विद. आई एम गोइंग टू हैव टू ब्रिटिश कमांडर्स विद अस. नाउ देयर वर टू soldiers, you know, mercenary soldiers are available. They had left the British, and they had joined up with the Indian Muslim rulers, and they were given command of two corps. That means two armies would be commanded by them, and the total strength of the Indian army, I would say the Indian Muslim army, was about 90,000 to 100,000, and it was divided into four flanks. The first flank on the right hand side was commanded by Mir Qasim, and on the left hand side it was the Mughal emperor, and there were two columns in the center which were commanded by two British generals. So इन्होंने अच्छी आर्मी बना रखी थी, पर इन्होंने ट्रेनिंग नहीं दी थी. एंड जब इनकी कॉन्फ्रेंस चली तो मीर कासिम ने उनसे पूछा, ही आस्क्ड द नवाब ऑफ अवध की, हाउ कॉन्फिडेंट आर यू ऑफ बीटिंग द ब्रिटिश. ही सेड आई एम वेरी कॉन्फिडेंट ऑफ बीटिंग द ब्रिटिश बिकॉज आई गॉट टू ब्रिटिश जनरल्स विद मी, and we will fight with them as equals. Now Mir Qasim said, are you aware about the training of the British army, Indian army? So he said, yes, we are also training the same way. Now that was a bit of a fallacy, because the Indians were not having the tactics and the war, the science of war, the art of war. They were not following the way the British were doing. Munro now marched from Calcutta, and at Buxar he camped, and the battle was to start in the morning. And as I've already told you, the Indian army, that is the Indian Muslim rulers' army, was divided into four flanks, and they were ready for battle. And he had something very important with him. That is, the Indian Muslim rulers had a very important complement with them. He had 5,000 horsemen from Afghanistan. They were known as the Afghan horsemen, and he had 5,000 of them with him, and they were to launch the first attack. And he was very confident that these five horsemen will attack, and then the main force will attack the British and wipe them out and throw them into the Bay of Bengal. देखिए ये सोचना बड़ा आसान है, but it's something very difficult to execute. Now Munro had only about 10,000 soldiers, out of which 1,000 were pure British and 9,000 were, as I told you, were sepoys of the Bengal and Madras armies. तो मेजर मुनरो ने एक प्लान ऑफ बैटल बनाया. He decided he was not going to attack this big force, so he formed his army into a square. It was a big square which was formed, but it was formed by two layers of soldiers. One layer was to keep sitting, the other used to stand and they will fire, and then the layer in the front will get up, and the layer which has fired will sit down, and then the layer which has stood up will fire. So it would be a continuous fire alternatively by the two groups of soldiers, one sitting and one standing. It was a very, very interesting maneuver. And the Afghan horsemen, 5,000 of them now charged, watched by the armies of Mir Qasim, Nawab Suja, and the Mughal emperor, and the two British generals who were commanding the two columns in the center. So the Afghan horsemen came riding on their horses towards this force of Major Munro. And as they were approaching, the firing was started by the British. The East India Company soldiers, who, as I told you, basically the Bengal and the uh, Madras sepoys, they began firing, and their firing was very accurate because they had been practicing a lot. And the British soldiers were also with them to bolster them, and they were very good soldiers. And the firing began, and hundreds of horsemen, Afghan horsemen, were shot down and they died. Now, seeing the first attack having failed, the Afghan horsemen retreated for a second attack. They were exhorted by the British commanders to attack again, and at the same time, the Indian forces were being got ready for the attack on the British. And the second attack began with the Afghan horsemen. The same thing happened. They could not reach the square, and the British had a deadly fire, and hundreds of horsemen again died. Now, when this was going on, it had a very demoralizing effect, on the generals, the British generals also, who were with the Indian forces, and they were wondering what the hell is happening. And they had not counted that the Afghan horsemen will collapse so easily. The Afghan horsemen, who were 5,000, were reduced to about 2,000, and they ran away from the battlefield. I mean, it was a heavy battle, and the first thrust has failed. Now, the order was probably given or not given to attack, but at that time, the forces who had been watching this demoralizing battle going on really panicked. The British now opened fire, and slowly the square began to move forward. And when it began to move forward and artillery fire, Mir Qasim and his group ran away. Seeing that the left flank has already run away, the two British generals could not control the matter because, and it was not their fault really. The will to fight was not there, and they had to run away. And the Nawab also ran away, and the Mughal emperor also went back to Delhi. It was a colossal defeat of the Muslim rulers in India at the hands of the British. And though they had a Hindu army, they were badly defeated. Not more than 10% of the soldiers of the Muslim rulers were Muslims. So it was a very, very decisive defeat, and I think as a soldier, I will give credit to Major Henry Munro of having joined up together in such a big force and had put an end to the battle so easily. Once this battle was over, Mir Qasim ran away, and ultimately, I think he died in an obscure village, unfor- totally forsaken and absolutely in penury. He didn't know what the hell was happening. The Nawab of uh, Awadh, he also didn't know what to do, and the Mughal emperor was holed up in his fortress in Delhi. Now, in this time, whole battle, the Marathas did not intervene. That is very important. The Marathas were the biggest Hindu rulers at that time in India, but they didn't intervene in support of the Muslim brethren. Why they didn't do it, we don't know. But at the same time, one small point about the Marathas, I'll tell you, when they had occupied Delhi, there was a lot of deference and respect they gave to the Mughal emperor, and they allowed him to continue. Now, this is something which is must be understood. That means all over India, whether you are a Hindu or a Muslim, the deference was shown to the Mughal emperor, and that is why in the 1857 mutiny, all the Hindus and the Muslims made Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was the emperor, Mughal emperor, the last Mughal emperor, as their symbol to fight the British and throw them out. So it is a moot point. I think you may all like to consider what I am saying, that the battle at that time was basically between the Muslim rulers in India and the British. And the Muslim rulers, how they came into power in an alien land and they were ruling a population was mostly Hindu, is beats my imagination. I just cannot understand it. But that is a fact of history, and I think sociologists may like to go through and examine at what exactly is the mental makeup of a Hindu that he gets so easily dominated by everybody. Even now, the same thing is happening, and in 1947, also the same thing happened when Gandhi and Nehru decided that India would be a secular state. When the basis of partition of India at that time was religion. Anyway, it's all over now by the shouting. And in 1764, after Major Henry Monroe had won, there is a monument erected to him in the Esplanade in Calcutta, which you go there, you can have a look at it. It's a wonderful tower there, small one, and it commemorates the victory at Buxar. Now, the Battle of Buxar and the Battle of Plassey, they are two classical battles, and I think historians do study it. Military historians study it, why it took place, why they took place first of all, and why such superior forces were defeated. And so I will like to come to the end of my discourse, and I hope, gentlemen, you like what I have said. And if you like, I will request you to subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and come back again. It'll be very interesting if I have more and more videos sent to you all if you press the bell icon. It's a very nice way of interacting with me. And I have given you a different insight into these battles. India had Muslim rulers throughout, and the rulers, that is the Praja, were all Hindus. There were very few Hindu rulers. Even Tipu Sultan, who ruled Mysore, was a Muslim. The Nawab of Hyderabad was a Muslim. And this happened because Aurangzeb's biggest empire in world history, that is the Mughal Empire, collapsed. After that, Muslim rulers continued ruling. And the Battle of Buxar, put a stamp on the British rule in India. And I will not say whether it was good or it was bad, but that is the fact of history. Goodbye, gentlemen. Goodbye, Jai Hind, and God bless.